Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second and final part of my Bloodborne without leveling up run. Last time I managed to get through about half of the game, at least in terms of main content, beating Rom and every boss possible up until her. Now that we've killed that spider, I'm sure everything's gonna get a lot better for the world. Well, that doesn't look good. Back in Yharnam, things are looking a lot redder than they did before, and there's these big monsters hanging around the place. These have actually always been here, and if you had a high enough insight, you can actually come across one way earlier in the game. There's now a lot of different directions I could head in, but I think it's time to handle some of the optional bosses before continuing on the main path. So to start with, I run through this new area until I can drop down here to grab the Upper Cathedral Ward key. Back in Odin Chapel, if I head towards the back entrance to Amelia's boss fight, but instead go into the building here, there's a big door that unlocks with the Cathedral Ward key, and following the path here leads to the Orphanage. And damn, I hate this place, not just because it's hard, but because of how creepy it is. It's so dark here, making it hard to find your way through, and on top of that, it's full of these brain sucker enemies who straight up suck. They mainly focus on attacks that stun you in place so that they can run over and use their one-hit kill grab move to not only kill you but steal some of your insight in the process. And you can't just ignore these things either. There's one specific one that you need to kill to get a key to continue on to the next boss. I tried so many times to kill this thing, but I'd either screw up against it or one of its friends would come up and screw me over. Eventually, after dying countless times to these things, losing all of my insight, I decided, screw it, and just killed them with Molotovs. I know, I said fair fights only in the rules, and this definitely isn't that, but A, that was mainly in reference to bosses, and B, screw you, I make the rules. With the Orphanage key now in hand, I head back to the main entrance and open it up from the inside. I also opened the gate on the other side, giving me a clear path to run back to the Dream, where I sold some more of my items to stock up on blood vials and move some runes around, putting on a Great Lake rune to increase my defenses. I then headed back towards the Orphanage, hung a right, following the path into this cute little garden where my next opponent can be found, the Celestial Emissary. This is a type of boss that From Software has done a few times in the past, and it's never been all that good, hence why this boss is often ranked as one of the easiest and worst in the game. It's essentially a room of standard enemies that will continue to spawn infinitely, but one of them is the true boss, and attacking it will damage the main health bar. It can be kind of hard to tell which one is the boss if you don't know what you're looking for, but once you hit it, it becomes pretty apparent, so you can just kind of focus on that one. I came into the fight expecting it to be a pushover, but I'm embarrassed to say that I actually kind of had a hard time with this one. Usually at this point in the game, it's real easy to kill these alien mushroom dudes to clear the field for a bit so you can just focus on the boss, but at this low level, it takes a good few hits to take one of these out, and they don't deal terrible damage, so if you get swarmed, it can easily mean the end. The actual boss one also does a pretty good job at staying with the crowd, so even if you know which one it is, it can be hard to get a hit on it without one of its friends coming in to give you a few slaps as well. After you deal enough damage to the main dude, it'll realize its disguise isn't working too awful well and will inflate into a big mushroom and get way more aggressive. This part of the fight is still made hard by having to deal with the little dudes, but I did find it much easier to lure the big fella off while taking care of the minions, then deal some damage to it while it was alone. Eventually, it gains the ability to, I think, power up all the little guys as well as a projectile attack, which can be annoying if you don't see it coming, but isn't too bad. I did unfortunately lose the clip of me beating the Emissary, so you'll have to cope with just seeing this one of me getting very close but dying pretty stupidly. It was kind of annoying that this boss that is usually such a pushover posed such a challenge at all, but I never really got frustrated with it. Honestly, I feel like this is probably the best way to experience this boss, or maybe at a slightly higher level. I think if this boss was accessible earlier in the game, people would remember it a little bit more fondly rather than just killing it and kind of forgetting it exists. Plus, it is kind of just fun to bobble the little mushroom heads around. My next target is basically just next door. Through this window and down an elevator, I enter the Altar of Despair, home to Ebrietas, daughter of the Cosmos. This thing is probably the most Lovecraftian the game has gotten so far, but despite its unsettling design, if my understanding of the lore is right, her story is actually quite tragic, being a young Great One left behind when the rest of her kind descended. As much as I love the design of her and her arena and the lore, I absolutely hate this fight. This is already one of the harder fights in the game, and at this level, it's just unbearable. Look at this damage, it's nothing, and it doesn't take much for her to kill us. Seriously, take a look at how most of my attempts at this fight went. Yeah, this happened a lot. What doesn't help as well is that her attacks can be kind of incomprehensible if you hadn't had the time to learn how to avoid them. Most of her slashes use both her little claw-armed things, but also the long tentacles coming from her back, giving her a bit of extra range, making it harder to dodge. You can get good at dodging most of these once you know what you're doing, but there's one attack that is just straight up unfair, and if you played this fight, you know what I'm about to say. That damn charge. Seriously, this attack is just plain bad and unfair. It has such a long range that there is no dodging back to get away from it, and her body is so wide that dodging to the side will still get you hit, only now you'll take extra damage since you take more damage if you're hit while dodging, and this will just be enough to kill you in one shot, even from full health. You can sometimes dodge through her, but that's really inconsistent and again will likely result in a one-hit kill, meaning that your only real option here is to just stand there and tank the attack, making it basically unavoidable damage. You might think as well that she'll do this only when you're far away or at mid-range, but no, she can do this whenever, doesn't matter how close you are, and she can do it repeatedly, which just eats away at your blood vials. There are a few things I can do to help make this fight easier. Ebrietas is weak to electric damage, so I can use a bolt paper on my weapon, which does make me deal slightly more damage, but these are kinda hard to come by as a resource, so if we use one and then die, it's a real waste. I also tried going to another area, more on that later, and got some bloodstone chunks to upgrade my weapon to +7, and well, nope, that was kinda pointless. I even really broke the rules, just to see if summoning would help, and I mean, yeah, this is doing better, but can I really call it a victory if this random NPC is doing all of the work for me? I was really stumped here. Every other boss I'd fought, even when I really struggled, I knew with enough perseverance I could be victorious over, but this genuinely seemed insurmountable. Ebrietas isn't the only boss we can go for right now though, so I decided to put a pin in her for now and move on to some other fights. For my next target, we have to head off to the distant land of Cainhurst, but it's not as simple as just walking there. First, I head to the Forbidden Woods and into this out-of-the-way cave. I then waded through some poison water, climbed up the world's longest ladder, and then its sibling, the world's second longest ladder, to emerge back out in Gehrman, right outside the clinic where we started the game. I headed through this gate in the back, up another ladder, and across the roof to get into the clinic through an open window. Here, I can find Yusefka, who has been doing some sort of experimenting on herself, and, well...
rather rapturous.
Damn, that laugh just gets stuck in my head, it's so creepy. While I'm here, I kill Yusefka to get a third umbilical cord which she has, which will be needed to get through to the true ending of the game. It might seem a little cruel to just kill her here, but if you've been doing the side quest of sending civilians to a safe haven and choose the clinic as their destination, she experiments on them, turning them into those alien mushroom creatures, so yeah, she probably has this coming. Anyway, what I'm really here for right now is the Cainhurst summons, which I can use in Hemwick to summon a horse and carriage to take me to the snowy castle of Cainhurst. This place is kind of the Edward to Yharnam's Jacob, as in it's vampires rather than werewolves. It's a cool area, but I don't really have all that much to say about it, as most of the enemies aren't too hard to deal with, though this one here with the blow dart just after the shortcut is a pain when doing the boss run back. The run back itself is also pretty short once you've gone all the way around the castle to unlock it and the ladder leading to the boss. Once on the roof, I had to do some awkward moves around these towers, which has never felt right to me. Kinda seems like they didn't know how to connect the boss arena to the rest of the area and just settled on this. There's even a bit of an unavoidable damage when dropping off this part, which really sucks since it means that I have to either go into the boss with less than max health or use a blood vial and now have less for the fight. As for the fight itself, entering the arena, I meet Martyr Logarius, this old skeleton looking dude. Look at how decrepit this guy is, this fight's gonna be a cinch. And well, the first phase actually kind of is. There's a bit of a learning curve for how to dodge and capitalize on his attacks, but once you've worked it out, he's kind of a pushover. Here's a hint, the attack where he summons a line of skulls is a great chance to deal some damage, since you can easily dodge through the attack and just go to town slashing at him. Problems really emerge when he enters the second phase, which will happen when he loses about a quarter of his health. He'll stop dead in his tracks for a second and slam his cane and scythe into the ground, which can be a good moment to get some more hits in, but you'll want to be careful since once he's done charging up, he'll let out a damaging AoE, which signals the true start of the second phase. Logarius gets much more aggressive, dropping most of his magic attacks and preferring to slash at you with his scythe and cane. You can technically parry this, but I found that trying that a lot of the time would just end up with me getting something sharp in the face, and even if successful, the visceral damage just isn't worth the risk. Occasionally he'll fly up into the air for a moment before hurtling back down towards the ground, and this is the best chance to get some damage of your own in. Dodging towards him when he's coming for you like this is a pretty good way to avoid damage, and you'll have a chance to quickly jump back towards him and get a couple hits of your own in. Don't get greedy though, just do 1 or 2, maximum 3 hits so you don't run out of stamina to dodge whatever attack he's got up his sleeves next. All of this is pretty easy, but what makes it kind of annoying is his flying sword attack. Basically, Logarius stabs a sword into the ground, causing a bunch of swords to start flying around the arena, and occasionally going for you. When he does this, you basically have to completely divert all attention to the swords and destroy it to stop the attack, which luckily only takes 1 hit. While you're focusing on that, the crazy skeleton grandpa is still trying to attack you regularly, giving him a decent opportunity to kill you while you're distracted. He can also do this move over and over and over again if he wants, and it just gets annoying to deal with. Not to mention that sometimes it glitched out and fell through the map, meaning that there was just nothing I could do about it, basically forcing a restart. I did eventually realize that you can just shoot the sword to get rid of it, which does make things a lot easier. I wish I'd known that sooner. I was having a really hard time with this second phase, and of course starting to run low on blood vials, so I had to keep wasting more time farming for them. The best spot I found was on the Great Bridge. At the other end of the bridge from the lamp, there's 2 Hamilton animations who most of the time drop 3 vials each, plus there's an ogre earlier on who drops a vial most of the time, sometimes up to 4, and a regular Yarnamite too, who sometimes drops 1, meaning that a good run through here can net you up to 11 vials pretty quickly. It also gives you enough echoes to get 1 and a bit vials back in the Hunter's Dream, which isn't much, but it still helps. Even then, having to come back here and grind for 10 to 20 minutes every time I ran out of vials gets really tiring really quickly. They really should have just included some sort of Estus flask substitute that refills your heals after death so that you wouldn't need to farm all the time. Anyway, I eventually got a good run on Martyr Logarius where he kept doing his flying attacks, giving me a lot of chances to deal damage, and I was able to finish him off while he tried to get his sword attack off. That's it for my time in Cainhurst for now, but I'll be back. For my next target, I need to head once again back to the Forbidden Woods, this time to talk with this lovely man in this house, who's kind enough to give me one of his tonsil stones. Thanks. With this, I head towards Amelia's boss room, hang a right, dealing with one of the 2 hunters down here to get some more bolt paper before heading into this building where I appeared after defeating Rom. Standing about here gets me picked up and killed by one of these giant creatures I pointed out before, the Amygdalas. I could have actually come here and gotten killed by this thing earlier, though I wouldn't have been able to see what it was doing the killing, but now with the tonsil stone in hand, this doesn't actually fully kill me. Instead, this weird guy, who I don't actually know the significance of, starts laughing at me and I wake up in the lecture building. This area is extremely small and kind of unimportant, so I just run through it to exit into the Nightmare Frontier. This is one of the most unique areas of the game in my opinion, mainly just because it's one of the few areas seemingly set at daytime. It's also a really annoying area, thanks to the enemies throwing boulders, poison waters, and these damn winter lanterns that build up frenzy, which is one of the most annoying status effects in the Souls series. Yeah, I don't like this area much, so I just made a straight shot to the shortcut, which basically leads from the lantern to the boss room. And my next foe is actually one of those Amygdalas, and this fight is kind of underwhelming. Seriously, these things have been built up for most of the game. You can encounter one right after Amelia and not even know what it is, then seeing them appear all over the place, watching over Yharnam after beating Rom. Heck, even a lot of the statues around Yharnam seem to resemble these things. The game is very clearly set up that these creatures have some sort of importance, and now we actually get to fight one, and how does the fight go? Just stab it in the crotch. Over and over and over again. Yeah, the easiest way to deal with the Amygdala is to just stay in its crotch, slashing at its legs. You do deal very little damage to its lower half, and much more by damaging its body and head, but that's alleviated a lot if you can cripple one of its legs, which isn't really that hard. You're not completely safe up close, but it's pretty easy to avoid its stomps and slaps, and you can actually still get some good hits on its head whenever it does its jumping attack, by dodging forward before it lands. It just really sucks, since this boss does have a really cool design, but you don't really get to appreciate it much when fighting it. It even has a cool moment when it switches phases and pulls off its own arms, but you likely won't see it since it's a good chance to get in close and deal some damage to those legs. I still died a few times to this boss, so I decided to go back to the Hunter's Dream and upgrade my weapon again, as well as adding some blood gems I found in the Frontier that changed my damage type to fire, which the Amygdala is weak to. Eventually, after about 6 attempts, I was able to beat down the Amygdala on my last blood vial. That's all of the optional bosses at least tried for now, so I think it's about time to get back on with the main path. I head back to where I was spat out after the fight with Rom and start making my way downtown through all the buildings until I end up in a very familiar location. Yeah, if this looks familiar, it's because this is where I was taken after being kidnapped by that bagman enemy way earlier in the game. Out on the streets of Yahar'gul Ghul, I scour the place for all the bloodstone chunks I can get my hands on, then head into this building and activate the shortcut back up to the lamp. Heading back to the dream, I upgrade my weapon all the way to +9. Now, to get to that final level, I need to find a blood rock, but I can't do that until later, so it's back to the waking world I go. I'm going to be using the shortcut to get back down to the streets to avoid that long trip down the stairs, but there's actually a second, slightly shorter shortcut that I can access by jumping off the elevator at the right time. Just across from here, there's this weird bowl thing which for some reason teleports me down to the street level. From here, it's just a short run across the bridge, kill a few enemies, and head down this ladder, and it's just a short walk over to where I encounter the One Reborn, the next target on my hit list. This thing is a failed attempt to recreate a great one, made up of a bunch of mangled bodies, kinda just smooshed together. Before doing anything else in this fight, I run to the back of the arena and head up these stairs to take out all of the Bellmaiders along the walkway here. They can cast fireballs and I think buff the boss, and usually I just ignore them, but in this run, getting hit by their fireballs when fighting the one itself is basically a death sentence, so they gotta go. This does suck since it takes a good little bit to kill all of them, and if you die, you've gotta do it all over again, and add that to the already long run back, attack, even with the shorter shortcut, it can get really frustrating. On the plus side, these ladies do drop echoes when you kill them, so if you do constantly get back to your bloodstain after death, you can rack up a nice little bank account. The long waits between actually getting an attempt at the boss are thankfully made a little bit more palatable thanks to the fact that the One Reborn itself is a bit of a pushover. I just kind of ran into its side and wailed on it for ages. Sure, this basically guarantees taking a few shins to the face, but as long as you dodge out and heal before you die, you can just kind of damage trade with it until you come out on top. There are still a few attacks that the one has that can hit me here, but the only one that was really of concern was the one that fills the arena with damaging liquid. I had no idea what was killing me here the first few times because I was so focused on damaging the boss, but once I knew what it was pretty easy to just get to higher ground. Other than that, the AoE it does from one of its ends is so short range that you can still attack the other end of it and not get hit, and the falling bodies attack is a total joke to dodge, making the One Reborn pretty quickly the One Unborn. Now that that's done, I can interact with this dead dude with an interesting choice of headwear which transports me back to the lecture hall building from before the fight with Amygdala, though this time on the second floor. Before I continue on with the rest of the game though, I think it's time for a rematch. I'm way stronger now than I was before, so Ebrietas, your days are numbered. Oh, well, I guess not. Well, to be fair, I honestly kind of expected that, but I had a backup plan. See, while I was working my way down to the One Reborn, I found a new weapon, the Pt2, and to my surprise, unlike all of the other weapons I'd found, I actually had the stats to wield it. So why is this useful? Well, unlike most other weapons that have transformed modes that can change their movesets, the Pt2 can be imbued with electricity, and flash back to the first time I fought her. Ebrietas is weak to electrics. Yeah, that. So this weapon should theoretically be a much better choice for this fight. Problem is, it's currently completely unupgraded compared to my Sword Cleaver, which is almost fully upgraded, so even if it's dealing a more effective damage type, the damage is still overall less. Of course, that can be easily fixed by upgrading them. Problem is that I've been selling off all my upgrade material to buy more blood vials, so it's time to do some grinding. Bloodstone shards can be easily farmed from these Hamilton animations down in Old Yharnam, who have a near guaranteed drop of them. Eventually though, I started to need twin bloodstones, and these are a little bit harder to come by. The best farming spot I found for these was in Cainhurst Castle from the gargoyle enemies, but they have a much lower, if still relatively common chance of dropping than the werewolves, making this a little bit more of a slog to collect. While I was back here, I decided to grab the Cainhurst Rest and the Martyr Logarius crown, which I didn't grab before for some reason. Now my style is really on point. I also decided to join the Vile Blood Covenant, which doesn't really serve a purpose other than I just kind of wanted to and haven't before. Eventually I got sick of the grind and just decided to upgrade my weapon as far as I could with what I got, then bought the rest of the twin bloodstones I needed from the inside shop. I also had exactly enough bloodstone chunks on me from my travels for one more upgrade, getting me to +7. Not bad at all, and after moving some of my gems from my Sword Cleaver to my Pt2, I was ready to face Ebrietas again. Still barely doing any damage. I mean, sure, it's slightly more than the Sword Cleaver, but really not a noticeable amount. Actually, with a bolt paper on it, the Sword Cleaver is doing more, and since I can't put bolt paper on the Pt2, it's just kind of straight up not as good. On top of that, the Pt2 has a secondary secret downside in that its durability plummets super fast. That might not seem too bad, but when after every 15 attempts or so I have to stop what I'm doing, grind some more echoes, go to the dream, repair my weapon, it gets old really fast. So, looks like if I'm doing this boss, it's gonna be with the Sword Cleaver. I could wait to fight Ebrietas till I get it to +10, but honestly, I don't think that's gonna help much. Same if I wasted more time grinding for more blood gems, so no, Ebrietas dies now. This fight took me days, not even including my first set of attempts on this boss, just the revisit had me stuck here longer than any other boss. It just wouldn't die. Over and over and over I tried and failed, seeing very little progress. Ebrietas was in my head. I would wake up early just to grind out some more attempts. When I got home from work, she was there, waiting for me, taunting me. Before bed every night, I would play this fight over in my head, trying to perfect my strategy. Beating Ebrietas became my life. My girlfriend would suggest maybe it was time for me to pack it in, and sometimes in my darkest moments, I would agree with her. She's not a mandatory boss. I could just move on. I don't have to beat her. But then I remember the old saying, 90% of Bloodborne players quit right before they're about to beat a boss. So, I kept going. On, and on, and on, and on. And then finally, progress. I started to get actually kind of good at this fight. Once I took into account the extra distance her tentacles give her when attacking, dodging them was a piece of cake, and I even learned how to relatively consistently dodge her BS charge attack. Don't get me wrong, it's still a gamble every time I tried this, and this attack still sucks, but I was good enough to feel somewhat confident rolling those dice over just tanking the charge damage. I also pretty quickly decided to change my armor. As pretty as the dress is, I need something a little bit sturdier. The effect this had was probably kind of minimal, as I still died in the same number of hits, hits, but the psychic buff of knowing I was technically better defended certainly helped out. As I went on, I also realised that body blows alone weren't going to cut it. They deal so little damage, and I have to put myself at a pretty high risk of a one-hit kill attack to do anything, so I wanted to try to avoid them where possible. Instead, I would try and bait out one of her many attacks where she used or lowered her head, and use the opportunity to deal some cranial carnage, since I do much better damage to her head over her body. Enough damage and I can even break it, staggering her and giving me a chance to do a visceral, or just continue absolutely wailing on her poor skull, now for even more damage since it's broken. This can only be done once per attempt though, as far as I can tell, and despite what you might think, I wouldn't try and do this too early on. Instead, I would try and be a little bit more conservative with my headshots, mixing in some body blows for the perfect moment, that being when she moves into phase 2 after she gets to about half health. When this happens, she charges up for a few seconds, lowering her head down, giving me a great chance for some more abuse, and if you can do enough to cripple it in this period, she will get staggered, giving you more time to damage the head, but also stopping her progressing into the next phase. Once she regains herself though, she will try and move into the second phase again, but this just gives me more time to go to town on a weak spot. You can deal some serious damage in this time, even more if you put a bolt paper on at the right moment before you start dealing damage. Unfortunately, I couldn't do enough to just kill her outright this time, meaning onto phase 2 it is. The main change in this phase is that she gains this weird damaging aura around her, making it impossible to get close to her to deal damage without having your health slowly whittled down, so make sure that you save some blood vials for this part. She gains a few new attacks as well, like this blood spit that can cause the dreaded frenzy and this laser attack that can be a pain to dodge, but really the strat kinda remains the same as before. You just kinda gotta hope that you get lucky with her doing the slam attack so that you can get the necessary damage in. I'd also recommend making sure that you've always got a bolt paper on to get the most out of every swing. Eventually, after too many hours to count, I finally did it. That was a satisfying kill. When I did it, I just kinda sat there in shock for a moment before going in to tell my GF it was finally over. She was very polite and acted proud of me, of course. Even with how satisfying it was, I'd still have to say that this was one of my least favourite fights in this run. I'm all for a good challenge, but the learning curve here was way too steep, and my deaths just made me feel less inclined to want to keep trying, which is the opposite of how a Souls fight should make you feel. You should be invigorated by your failures to come back and succeed. I feel like that with a bit of tweaking, it could have been a really great fight. Maybe have a way to cut off her tentacle arms to limit her range and just straight up remove that bloody charge. But anyways, that's the last of the non-final, non-optional bosses, so let's get back onto the main path. I headed back to the lecture hall, second floor, and just like with the first floor, ran through it as quickly as I can since there's not really much here of interest, and ended up in the Nightmare of Mensis. I was dreading this area for one reason, and that was the frenzy build-up. As you go through the area, you'll slowly build up frenzy as long as you're not behind cover. This makes it really hard to deal with enemies since a lot of the time they don't like to stay in a safe area to have our fight. At least frenzy builds up on them as well, though it's nowhere near as lethal on them as it is on me, so I wouldn't really rely on this finishing your fights for you. I didn't actually end up having too bad of a time here though. Turns out the frenzy is only really a thing at the start of the area, and since frenzy build-up speed is based on how much insight you have, and I have very little, it's super easy to just tank it and get out of the area of effect. From there, it's just a short run through Mergo's loft to activate a shortcut to a new lamp, and now I don't ever have to worry about the frenzy area again. I think the only reason I actually struggled with this area in my first playthrough was because I didn't know how insight works, so just kind of hoarded it all, making the frenzy an absolute nightmare to deal with. Anyway, getting through the loft isn't much harder. Most of the standard enemies of this area won't even attack usually, I don't think, and the bigger dudes who can pose a threat are few and far between. There's these chimera half dog half bird enemies who aren't any harder than their standard dog and birds, but are kind of just freaky to deal with. Anyway, a little bit further up the loft, I activate a shortcut elevator back down to the lamp from before, and from here it's just a short walk over to good old Cuckcage himself, Micolash, host of the Nightmare. This was a fight that I was absolutely dreading, not because I thought it was going to be hard, but because of the run back every time I failed. Now, you might be thinking, didn't I just say that the shortcut down to the lamp is not far from his boss room? Yes, but the distance from the lamp to the boss isn't actually what I meant when I say run back. You see, this dude is a massive troll, and instead of fighting us straight up, he likes to run away, spouting his mouth off, and the only way to actually get into the fight portion of his battle is to corner him into this little room. Now, once you know what you're doing, it's not too hard to consistently back him into the corner, but the annoying chase portion before every attempt seriously starts to get old after just a few goes. Luckily, the fight with him is piss easy. We do pretty great damage, and we can pretty easily stun lock him until our stamina's out. He does have a Call Beyond, which is a magic ability that can one-hit kill me, and I've heard some people really have a hard time dodging this, but, and I don't mean to sound rude here, how? It's pretty easy to predict, and a quick dodge to the side is easily enough to get out of the way of it, and put you in a great position to continue just wailing on him. But this isn't the end of the fight, as once Micolash gets down to half health, he disappears, and I now have to follow him to another arena, where I now need to do another chase segment, this time way more convoluted, with Micolash able to teleport around using mirrors. Again, once you know what you're doing, consistently getting him cornered isn't too hard, but it's just annoying, especially with all the cos nonsense he's spewing on about. Or some say cosm. Once he's trapped, I try to do an attack from above when dropping down into his arena. This phase is basically the same as the last, though Micolash now has another magic attack that shoots these little beams out at you, and this is a little harder to dodge IMO, but once you get a feel for it, this fight is already in the bag.
Now I'm waking up! I'll forget everything!
After Micolash finally kicks the bucket, we're officially in the endgame. Any of the 3 remaining bosses could be the final one depending on what ending I'm going for, but to make sure I can get to the true ending, I need some umbilical cords, and since I was asked to leave the maternity ward, I have to head to the abandoned hunter's workshop instead. To get there, I dropped down that big tower that I used to get around the gate to Amelia, but this time was aiming for this little platform with a door on it. Getting here took me way more tries than it should have, but eventually I got there and was able to get into the abandoned workshop. This place might look a little bit familiar, since it's the inspiration for the hunter's dream, and here I can get the second, third umbilical cord. Just one more and we can get the true ending, but I'll get that one later. There is something else I want to do as well before fighting the next boss. After activating this shortcut back down to the last shortcut, I can jump off the elevator early. After getting past this hell bridge swarmed with winter lanterns, I pulled this lever, causing the big brain they had up in the attic to drop down. This was actually what was causing the frenzy back in the starting part of the area, and getting rid of it also gets rid of the frenzy, but that's not why I did this. By dropping down this area here and heading to where the brain fell down, I can get the one and only blood rock in the game, and finally fully upgrade my weapon to +10, which will definitely come in handy for the next fights. Okay, so back onto the hunt. In the next area, I come across some familiar faces, those being the shadows, now downgraded from bosses to standard enemies. It can be a little bit intimidating seeing a boss just roaming an area, but at this point these guys are super easy to deal with, and given how many echoes they drop, this is a great spot for some grinding. At the top of Mergo's loft, we come across this bloody woman, and not like a bloody woman, but like a woman covered in blood. After activating the shortcut back to near the lamp, I head in to meet with Mergo's wet nurse, and for a final boss candidate, she is very underwhelming. Most of her attacks are really basic and easy to dodge, and after almost every attack you get a good couple of seconds to deal some damage of your own in. She does have a difficult phase where a big fog appears and clones first start spawning to attack you, which can be kind of stressful, but it doesn't last forever, and as long as you're on your toes dodging the Mergos as they attack and healing when necessary, you can easily get through it and back into the normal fight. From my understanding as well, this phase is actually triggered by an attack that can be dodged, but I don't know how to do that, so it's just easier to outlast it. Yeah, pretty lame for a final boss honestly, not bad, but I just feel for anyone who ended the game with this, especially with how cool one of the coming fights is. Once defeated, the cries of the baby the boss was nursing slowly subside, and once gone completely, our hunt is finally over. Oh yeah, by the way, our goal was to kill a baby, did I not mention that? For beating Mergo's wet nurse, I also get the third 1/3 umbilical cord, and if my math adds up, that equals a whole umbilical cord, meaning it's time to chow down. Yummy. Anyway, I can now return to the hunter's dream, which has been set ablaze. A whole new area of the dream has been opened up now, this beautiful flower garden with a tree looking over it, and sitting under that tree is Gehrman. He congratulates me on finishing the hunt, which is praise I've well deserved. He offers me mercy by killing me in the dream, ending my hunt for good. In order to continue on, I refuse his mercy, leading to this absolutely amazing cutscene where Gehrman raises from his wheelchair to stand imposingly before revealing a massive scythe. I love this so much. The reveal that Gehrman, this old wheelchair-bound man who has been a pretty minor character just sitting in the dream, not really doing much, is actually an extremely capable fighter, is so intimidating and unexpected. And this whole fight is made even better when you know a bit about the lore. I know I've shied away from lore and story talk so far, but I love this fight so much, so bear with me, I'm a fangirl for a second. Gehrman isn't fighting us out of hate or malice, it's out of kindness, since as he mentioned, if we accept death in the dream, our hunt will be over, and we'll wake up to see the sun rise over Yharnam, a fate that he, as the host of the nightmare, Gehrman will never experience. Now, this isn't really a perfect ending for us, since it doesn't actually deal with any of the problems Yharnam's going through, so the night of the hunt will come again, and this time, we won't have our cool hunter powers to see us through it, but from Gehrman's perspective, it's the best he can do for us. Not only that, but Gehrman doesn't know about the umbilical cord I chowed down on, so as far as he knows, if he dies, the sinister presence behind the dream will just make us take his place, dooming us to the same fate as him for eternity. Gehrman is just such a cool character in my opinion, and it makes the fight with him so much better, which it didn't really need help with, since on its own, this fight slaps, being probably probably my second favourite one in the entire series, only surpassed by Slave Knight Gale in Dark Souls 3. He slowly walks towards us, but at a moment's notice he can spark to life to do a swift attack, and if you don't know how to dodge it, at best you'll survive with what must be like 1 HP at this level. Once I'd learned how to dodge his attacks though, it just became like second nature. Jump attack, walk away, then dodge in for a charged heavy attack. His 3-hit combo, 1 dodge back, 2 dodges forward, followed by a charged heavy. Tries to pull me in with his scythe, dodge forward, charged heavy. It sounds cringy to say, but the only way I can describe this feeling is like a dance. Just one where if I miss a step I get a scythe to the face. You might have noticed that I favour the charged heavy attack in this fight, and that's because if you get greedy with regular attacks you can do more damage, but if he starts charging up one of his heavy jump attacks you can't get away in time, and it's a gamble whether or not you'll stagger him out of it, so I found it safer to just go with a heavy attack. Not very long in, he'll switch over to start using his sword as well as the blunderbuss, and this part gets a lot tougher, and I never really worked out how to effectively do it. His blunderbuss is absolutely lethal, being able to OHKO from full health if we're too close, but when he uses it, it's also our best chance to get a hit in since it stops him in place for a moment. Dodging forward and to the right seemed to be the best way to avoid getting hit, but every time I did it, it felt a little bit too risky. He'll also sometimes do this weird slow turn to face you, which is a good time to get some hits in, but as always, don't be too greedy or you'll regret it. The best chance for damage though in this part is when he does this attack, since shooting him at any time during it is basically a guaranteed stagger, meaning it's a chance to get in and deal a visceral. This doesn't do great damage, but since it's basically free damage, I'm not going to turn it down. At half health he enters his final phase, and this is signified with this scream, which is a great chance to deal some damage. He also does this AoE shortly after, which seems weird. I don't know why they had him do both of these to transition the fight. It seems like just the AoE alone would have made more sense, but whatever. From here on out he can now freely switch between movesets, but now being powered up by the moon's glow he can teleport around and gains a few new attacks. The only one that really worried me is this scythe one where he can jump into the air and cause some tornadoes to come at us, which if it hits us is just a straight up death. I was really unsure of how to dodge this for a while, and every time I got to this phase he would just do this and insta-kill me, but I found out that you can just kind of slowly walk backwards and it will fairly consistently blow past you. Just make sure that you don't get backed into a corner or a wall. Other than that, just keep doing what you're already doing for the rest of the fight. As I said, I find the scythe moveset easy to work around, so I was always more aggressive whenever he pulled that one out. Before starting the fight, I made sure to stock up on blood vials, and looking at how many killing the wet nurse was able to get me, I was sure that I'd be set for the whole fight, but no, I quickly used all of those up on failed attempts. I also switched my armor and weapons setup around a bit, putting Micolash's cuck cage on for some slightly better defenses, and putting the highest damage gems I could onto my weapon to get the most out of it. I also bought a lot of bolt paper from the insight shop to help increase my damage, usually putting one on at the start of the second or third phase depending on how poorly I was going on that attempt. This fight took me ages. Even after I knew how it worked, I would still die because my execution was just faulty, but it never felt undoable, and with each death I was just more determined to be victorious, which is the feeling a truly great Souls fight should imbue you with. And of course, eventually, I came out on top, and man, the feeling of achievement after beating a good Souls fight is just indescribable. Sleep well, Gehrman. Your hunt is over. No time to rest for us though, as right after Gehrman's defeated, the force behind everything in the game comes down from the sky, the moon presence. With Gehrman gone, it needs a new host for the hunter's dream, and so comes down to get some kissy from me. Thanks to those umbilical cords I devoured though, I have the power to turn down its advances, and like many of my spurned lovers, this enrages it. Now it's time for our true final hunt, and this thing is so lame. I mean, it's not a bad fight, but for the final big bad, the man behind the curtain pulling the strings of everything, it's just such a basic fight. All of its attacks are super easy to dodge, and for the final boss of the game, its defense is a weak sauce. Like, I know I upgraded my weapon to full and put some damaging gems on it, but I'm still at just level 10. I wouldn't have thought I'd be dealing this much damage. It does have an attack that can make you unable to heal for a bit, and one that lowers your HP to 1, which in combination are theoretically really brutal, but after lowering your HP to 1, it kind of just sits there for ages, doing nothing, giving you plenty of time to deal some good damage in and rally your health back without even having to waste a vial. Again, I don't hate this fight, but for the last fight in the game, it's just kind of lame, especially after how awesome Gehrman's fight was. With the moon presence defeated, we finally achieve our goal of becoming a squid and getting held by a beautiful woman. Ah, what a dream come true. The beautiful woman part, that is, not becoming a squid. No, I would never want that. So, can I beat Bloodborne without leveling up? Surprisingly, yeah, I can. Honestly, this was a bit of a shock to me. I wasn't expecting to even get past Amelia. If I'm being honest, at several points like Amelia, the Shadows, and She Will Not Be Named, I really was convinced that I couldn't do it. But here we are. I know by definition this isn't as hard as a true Blood Level 4 run, I really screwed up there, but it's still a real achievement. I mean, looking at the trophies for this game, not even half of the players make it to the game's most basic ending, and I doubt many of them were playing as handicapped as I was. Even with how satisfying this was, I wouldn't go as far as to call it fun. In fact, quite the opposite in parts. This run has taken up so much of my life and had me pulling up my hairs at so many points that I was genuinely convinced that despite starting it back in like early July, I wouldn't be able to get to the game's most basic ending in time to call this a Halloween vid. So before you ask, no, I will not be doing this again for any of the other Souls games. This was a one-time thing. Let me go back to runs of fun, cute platformers now. With that said, if you stuck it out this whole time, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, why not consider liking and subscribing for more runs like this in the future. And until next time, I've been Katie Cat, and thank you for watching.